right, Psalm 14. Let's call this one for justice over corruption in this chapter that starts with a very famous passage. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. But it's not simply going to talk about non believers, or it's seemingly talking about something more than people who simply don't believe that there is a God. When it's going to go on to say at the end of that verse, they are corrupt, they do abominable deeds. Which seems to still possibly be talking about those who don't believe, but it's going to go on to say there is none who does good. And then it's going to talk about the way in which God himself looks down from heaven to find someone who might, going on to say in verse 3, they have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. And it's eventually going to go on to talk about a generation, saying that even if in this era it seems that it's impossible to find one person who does good, it's going to offer some hope. Once again, another turn or pivot in verse 5 where it says, there they are in great terror, for God is with the generation of the righteous, as the psalm is going to go on to conclude in verse 7. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people. Understanding and going back to what we saw in chapter 12, that there is this whole concept of generations. Chapter 12 focusing on the generation of the wicked. It seems to be completely consumed in wickedness. Chapter 14 is pointing forward to a generation that God delivers and protects, no matter how seemingly corrupt an entire generation has become, pointing us in some ways back to Israel's 40-year run around the wilderness before God brought the next generation into the promised land. One generation he delivered out of Egypt, a generation that gave itself over to complaining and quite possibly corruption, as we see here in chapter 14, walked around the wilderness in circles until they were gone, and God was ready to bring the next generation into what he had promised. This chapter providing us another example of the way in which even God's quite powerful people like Job, David, or the people of Israel who left Egypt as a powerful nation, mighty in number, so mighty that they intimidated their slave masters. But no matter how powerful God's people become, he brings us into periods of time where we either cannot deliver ourselves by our own strength, thus what we talked about before, the term meekness, strength under control, or we cannot effectively get our way in our own strength by maintaining our integrity. And so this chapter concludes once again when it says, oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion when the Lord restores the fortunes. Once again, we're hearing from David, a mighty man, an anointed king, understanding not only the ways in which God gives strength and ability to those he anoints, but the ways in which he teaches them the strength to wait. When getting your way by force, by scheme, or by spin, it just seems to make more sense.